With a heavy breath, Arthur's gathered his courage and stepped inside a small cafe. "Excuse me? Could you tell me the way to Willow Street?" The manager looked at him with disgust, as though Arthur's presence alone was a crime. "We don't serve beggars here. Out!" he barked. The rain was hammering down on the city, drowning the streets in silver streams as people rushed beneath umbrellas, too busy to notice the frail old man standing alone on the sidewalk. His name was Arthur. His coat was thin, his shoes soaked, and in his trembling hands he clutched a wrinkled paper map. His eyes searched for kindness, but all he found was indifference. With a heavy breath, he gathered his courage and stepped inside a small cafe, water dripping from his sleeves to the floor. His voice was soft, almost pleading. "Excuse me. Could you tell me the way to Willow Street?" The manager looked at him with disgust, as though Arthur's presence alone was a crime. "We don't serve beggars here. Out!" he barked, his finger stabbing toward the door. Arthur's eyes widened. He shook his head gently. No, I'm not asking for money. I only need directions." But before he could finish, a cup tipped from the counter, spilling hot coffee across his trousers. The crowd chuckled. A young man whispered to his friend, "Look at him. Grandpa's lost in his own city." Another pulled out his phone to record, hungry for the spectacle of someone else's humiliation. Arthur's cane slipped on the wet tile, and he fell hard to his knees. A shelf rattled, sending candy bars scattering across the floor. The security guard stormed over, his voice sharp. "Get up, old man!" "You're blocking the way." He kicked the cane aside as if it were trash. Arthur's hands shook as he reached for the candy bars, gathering them one by one, his lips quivering. I don't want trouble. I just need directions." But his words were swallowed by the laughter behind him. The manager shook his head, sneering. "Pathetic. Some people don't know when to stop." The guard grabbed Arthur by the arm and shoved him toward the door. The glass hissed open, and the storm came roaring in. Cold rain slammed against his fragile body as he stumbled outside. The map tore in two, one piece carried off by the wind like a broken bird. Arthur stood at the curb, chest heaving, his palm pressed to his heart. Cars sped by, spraying muddy water across his legs. Strangers brushed past without so much as a glance. Not a single hand reached for him. Not a single voice offered comfort. To the world, he was just a lost, useless old man. But what they did not know, what none of them could even imagine, was that Arthur wasn't just anybody. Behind those tired eyes and trembling hands was a man who once held power. That humiliated figure, standing alone in the rain, was a billionaire. Arthur's steps were slow as he left the cafe, the storm pressing against his shoulders like a punishment. He pulled his torn map from his pocket, trying to piece it back together. But the paper was ruined. The streets blurred in the rain, yet what cut deeper than the storm was the silence of people who passed him by without a glance. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the man who once signed million-dollar contracts and built empires brick by brick. All they saw now was an old man who looked like he had nothing. Back at the small apartment he rented after losing his home, Arthur faced another cruelty. His landlord stood waiting at the door, tapping his foot impatiently. "Mr. Johnson," he said coldly, "you're 3 weeks behind on rent." "I can't keep waiting." Arthur opened his wallet, but inside was only a single worn photo of his late wife and a few crumpled bills. "Please, just a little more time," he whispered. The landlord shook his head. "I have no sympathy for freeloaders. You've got until tomorrow to get out." The door slammed in Arthur's face, leaving him trembling in the hallway. He didn't yet know that this decision would nearly cost him his life. Arthur sank into the rickety chair in his room, staring at the peeling paint on the walls. He thought of his son, Daniel, a son he had once raised with hope, sending him to the best schools, believing he would carry the family legacy. But Daniel hadn't called in months. When Arthur tried reaching out, the response was sharp and cruel. "Dad, stop embarrassing me. You wasted your money and now you expect me to clean up your mess? You're on your own." Arthur's heart broke all over again. He had sacrificed everything for his family, and now even his own blood had turned against him. The following morning, Arthur walked the streets again, clutching the photo of his wife in his pocket. He tried entering a bank, hoping to withdraw a small amount from an old account, but the teller looked at him like he was a nuisance. "I'm sorry, sir. This account is frozen. You'll need authorization." Arthur's eyes filled with panic. "But that's my money." The teller leaned closer, whispering, "Maybe you should ask your son. He's already been making changes to the accounts." Arthur stumbled back, his legs shaking. Betrayed by his own son, robbed of the little security he had left, he stepped into the street without noticing the car rushing toward him. The horn blared, tires screeched, and Arthur barely made it back onto the sidewalk, gasping for breath. He didn't yet realize that his enemies were not finished stripping him of everything he once had. That evening, Arthur returned to his apartment, only to find his belongings thrown into the hallway. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, whispering, laughing, pointing. "Look at him, thrown out like trash," one woman muttered. His clothes, his books, even the framed photo of his wife, all tossed carelessly onto the dirty floor. Arthur knelt to gather them, his fingers trembling, his eyes clouded with shame. He wanted to scream, to defend his dignity, but his voice broke before it reached his lips. Rain drummed against the window outside as Arthur sat in the hallway surrounded by the last pieces of his life. He held the photo of his wife close to his chest and whispered, "I'm sorry. I couldn't hold it together." The sound of laughter from the neighbors echoed down the corridor, a cruel reminder of how far he had fallen. What Arthur didn't know was that in just a few short hours, he would meet someone who would change everything, a poor teenage girl who would see what no one else could. Night fell heavy on the city. The streets glistened under neon lights, rain still dripping from the rooftops. Arthur sat on a park bench with his few belongings stuffed into a torn plastic bag. His hands were stiff from the cold, his breath clouding in the night air. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but the sharper pain was in his chest. A dull, heavy throb that seemed to grow worse with each passing hour. He pressed his palm against it, whispering to himself, "Not yet. Not yet." The world around him moved fast. Cars sped past, couples laughed as they hurried home, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. But to Arthur, time slowed. His fingers traced the edge of the photo he always carried, the face of his late wife smiling up at him. He closed his eyes, almost hearing her voice. "You're stronger than this, Arthur. Don't give up for a moment," he believed her. Then another wave of pain crushed his chest, bending him forward until he was gasping for air. Shadows loomed. 3 young men approached, their voices sharp, carrying the careless tone of those who had never known struggle. "Hey, old man," one of them sneered. "What's in the bag?" Arthur clutched it close. "Please, just leave me be." They laughed, circling him like wolves. One snatched the bag, spilling his clothes onto the wet pavement. The photo of his wife fluttered out and landed face down in the mud. Arthur reached for it desperately, but a boot came down, grinding it into the dirt. His heart lurched. "Stop!" he cried, his voice cracking. But they only laughed harder. One pushed him back onto the bench while another rifled through his pockets. They found nothing but the broken wallet and tossed it aside. "Worthless," one muttered. Yet the cruelty wasn't in what they stole. It was in what they left behind. Arthur's dignity, torn and trampled. The men drifted off into the night, their laughter fading, leaving Arthur trembling and alone. The rain returned, harder this time, soaking him to the bone. His body shook violently as the cold seeped into him. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the ground. His cheek pressed against the freezing pavement, water pooling around him. The city lights blurred above him, glowing halos he could barely focus on. His mind drifted in and out, torn between reality and memories of better days. He saw his wife smile, his son as a child running into his arms, the office where men once stood when he entered the room. Now, no one stood. No one even noticed. Arthur's chest tightened, sharp pain stabbing deep. He struggled for breath, his lips whispering broken words. "Help! Someone! Please!" But no one came. The sound of footsteps passed nearby, quick and careless, as though he were invisible. His vision darkened at the edges, and he felt himself slipping, sinking into a silence he feared he would not return from. For the first time in his life, Arthur wasn't sure he would see another sunrise. And as the storm raged above, he realized this might be the night the world forgot him for good. Arthur's body trembled as he lay on the cold pavement, soaked to the skin, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The night had nearly swallowed him whole when a voice broke through the rain. "Sir? Are you okay?" It was soft, hesitant, the kind of voice that still carried innocence in a world that had forgotten compassion. A teenage girl, no older than 16, knelt beside him. Her clothes were worn, her shoes scuffed, and yet her eyes, bright, determined, were filled with more kindness than anyone had shown him in years. She reached out, taking his hand without hesitation. "You need help. Come on, I won't leave you here." Arthur tried to protest, whispering through cracked lips, "No, don't trouble yourself." But the girl shook her head firmly. "My name's Emily, and I'm not leaving you." She slipped her arm under his and with surprising strength pulled him to his feet. For the first time in a long time, Arthur felt something he thought he had lost forever: dignity. Emily guided him to a shelter at the edge of the street, where she offered him half of her sandwich, the only food she had for the night. Arthur hesitated, his pride wrestling with his hunger, but the sincerity in her eyes broke down the walls he had built. As he ate, his gaze fell on her thin jacket, clearly not warm enough for the storm. He swallowed hard, shame and gratitude mixing in his chest. Hours passed in silence until Emily finally asked, "Why were you out there all alone?" Arthur lowered his head, the weight of years pressing down. "Because I let people believe I was no one. And maybe I started to believe it too." She frowned. "No one? That can't be true. There's something about you. You don't seem like just anyone." Her words cracked something open inside him. For the first time in years, Arthur spoke the truth. "Emily, I wasn't always like this. Once, I had everything people chase after: wealth, power, respect. My name was Arthur Johnson. Maybe you've heard of the Johnson Group?" Emily's eyes widened. The Johnson Group was a name she had heard on the news, a massive corporation tied to half the city's businesses. You mean that's you?" Arthur nodded slowly. "It was me. Until my own son betrayed me. He forged my signature, took control of the accounts, and froze me out. The board turned on me. The home I built was stripped away. To them, I was just an old man who had outlived his usefulness." His voice cracked with pain. "And the world believed it. They all believed it." Emily's heart raced. She looked at the man before her, not a beggar, not a broken figure, but a giant who had been pushed to his knees. The truth hung in the air, heavy and electrifying. The man lying in the dirt hours ago was no ordinary old man. He was the founder of an empire, betrayed by blood, cast into the streets by greed. Arthur's hand trembled as he clutched hers tighter. "I thought I'd lost everything, Emily. But tonight, you reminded me, I still have something no money can buy. Humanity." And in that moment, the storm outside seemed to fade. The city still roared, but a spark had been lit. What Arthur didn't yet know was that this spark, this girl who refused to walk past him, would soon ignite a fire that even his enemies couldn't put out. Emily was not a girl of riches. She was a student, barely 16, living in a hostel away from her family. Life had taught her to fight for herself, and maybe that's why she had a soft spot for people who were invisible to the world. In her free time, she ran a small Facebook page where she wrote about social issues, poverty, corruption, injustice. Hardly anyone noticed her posts. But deep inside, she believed stories could change lives. That night, when she found Arthur shivering in the rain, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her small hostel bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what can I do? How do I help him? The next morning, she called a friend who volunteered at a shelter and arranged a bed for Arthur. For the first time in weeks, Arthur slept on a mattress instead of a park bench. But Emily wasn't done. She sat at her desk, opened her old laptop, and began to type. She wrote Arthur's story with trembling fingers, not just what she saw, but what she felt. She posted his picture on her Facebook page with the words, "This man built empires, and now he sleeps on the streets because of betrayal." At first, it got a few likes, then dozens, then hundreds. Within 2 days, the post exploded. Thousands of people shared it. Hashtags trended. Journalists sent her messages. "Is this true? Can we meet him?" Emily agreed. She greeted reporters at the shelter and introduced them to Arthur. Nervously, Arthur opened his old leather briefcase, the only possession he had guarded like treasure. Inside were contracts, board minutes, and letters proving his role as the founder of Johnson Group. The media gasped. Cameras clicked furiously. This wasn't just a sob story. It was the scandal of the decade. News channels ran with it. Headlines blared. "The billionaire on the streets, betrayed by his own son." Public anger exploded. Protesters gathered outside Johnson Group headquarters. "Justice for Arthur!" they shouted. Reporters chased Daniel Johnson, firing questions he couldn't answer. The pressure was too great. The government launched an inquiry. Weeks of investigation revealed the truth. Daniel had forged documents, seized accounts, and pushed his own father out of the empire he built. The verdict was swift. Daniel guilty, Arthur restored to his rightful place. When the judgment was announced, Arthur stood trembling, tears spilling down his cheeks. He turned to Emily, pulled her into his arms, and whispered, "I lost everything, but you gave me back my life. You were the daughter I never had." The inquiry had ended, but its impact shook the entire city. The Johnson Group, under immense media and government pressure, officially reinstated Arthur Johnson as founder, emeritus, and honorary chairman. His due share of the empire, which had been hidden away by Daniel, was restored to him in full. For Arthur, it wasn't the billions that mattered. It was the dignity of being recognized once more as the man who had built it all. News channels flashed images of him stepping into the company's headquarters again, this time not as a beggar, but as the rightful patriarch. Board members stood in silence, ashamed of how easily they had turned their backs. Arthur said nothing harsh. He simply nodded, as if to remind them, wealth fades, but character remains. But Arthur's redemption wasn't complete until he returned to the places where his humiliation had begun. Days later, a gleaming black limousine stopped in front of the very cafe that had once thrown him out into the storm. The door opened, and out stepped Arthur in a fine suit, supported gently by Emily at his side. The same manager who had sneered at him nearly dropped the tray in his hands. The manager stammered, "Mr. Johnson, I didn't know." Arthur raised a hand. His voice was calm but sharp. That was the problem. You never cared to know he didn't stay to punish them. His presence alone was the punishment. The beggar they mocked had returned as a king. Arthur wasn't just restored to wealth. He was restored to respect. And as he stood once again before his home, Emily by his side, he knew the truth. Power and money could be stolen, but kindness could not. The world had mocked him when he was weak, but now it bowed before him because of one poor girl who refused to walk away. Arthur looked at Emily, his voice trembling. "You gave me back more than money or status. You gave me my life." And as the sun broke through the clouds, the image of a billionaire hugging a poor teenage girl became etched in the city's memory, a reminder that justice, though delayed, always finds its way home.